Well, welcome everybody. I'm John Felix, the president of PHSNE. And before I hand it off to Dana to talk about tonight's program and introduce our speaker, I just want to say a couple words. First of all, welcome. I also want to just remind folks that every year we have an annual meeting, and usually takes place in December. We're actually required to do this to keep our nonprofit status. And this meeting will take place at our next meeting in December. Now, when I say a meeting, it's just going to be just a short segment of holiday meeting in December. And but at that meeting, it will give me an opportunity for just spend a couple minutes talking about the accomplishments that we did the previous year. I'll maybe spend a minute or so on our financial situation. And finally, it provides an opportunity for all the members to ask questions of the board members. And I don't think this is going to take a whole lot of time, but we will be doing that at our next meeting, which should be at 7:30 on December 4th. So with that, I don't want to spend any more time me talking. I'm going to hand it over to Dana so we can get into tonight's what I think is going to be a very exciting program. We're looking forward to this one for a while. So Dana, do you want to take it over?
Thanks, John. And am I assuming that the annual meeting is at 7 and then the holiday party is at 7:30?
Yes. Okay. Yes. And by the way, we will be sending out a link for people to join that meeting. I meant to mention that, but yeah, thank you for clarifying that. That will be at 7.
Okay, great. Thanks. Before I introduce our speaker, Ken Liss, just a few announcements. I'm Dana G. I'm the program coordinator for PHSNE. You may have seen when you signed on that the active screen is being recorded for YouTube. So this presentation will be archived on our YouTube channel in a little bit after today. And if you're familiar with Zoom, you probably don't need instructions, but please stay muted with the red line through your microphone for the entire presentation. And then at the end, I'll relay questions typed into the chat during the presentation to Ken. And then at the very end, if there's still time, we'll have a few live questions. So as we're going along, if there are questions you would like to ask, please type them into the chat, which you'll find at the bottom of the screen, little speech balloon, and address it to everyone, which is the default, so we can all see the questions. And speaker view, and if you go to the top right, you can select which view is best. If you're in gallery, you will see all the little squares the same size. If you switch to speaker, you'll see the speaker and the presentation larger, so that you'll be able to observe, the presentation. And then at the very end, we'll have more information about how to sign up for the holiday show and tell party, which we enjoy doing every year. Members can sign up for like a 5 to 10 minute slot where you can share a camera or a story or a photograph or something that you'd like to share with the members. And it's a nice evening. So I'll paste the link to sign up at the end of the meeting. Okay. So our speaker, Ken Liss, is president of the Brookline Historical Society. Retired, he recently served as the head of instruction at the Boston University Libraries from 2014 to 2021. He previously served as a librarian at Boston College, the Harvard Business School, at a nonprofit organization, and a library software company. Liss has a blog about Brookline history. I've pasted that link into the chat, as well as the link to the Brookline Historical Society. In 2014, the BHS was given a tiny photo album of tintypes, and Ken will share with us tonight the research he uncovered on the people and the photographs. So take it away, Ken.
So back about 25 years ago, when I was in my some of my early jobs as a librarian after a couple of other careers, if somebody had said I'd be doing a presentation at the Photographic Historical Society of New England, I probably would have asked what they were smoking. But one of the things that I've learned through my own research and that I taught undergraduate students in how to do research is that once you start a research project, you never know what rabbit holes you're going to go down and where it's going to lead. And I often describe my own method of research is directed stumbling. That you stumble about in a topic, but you get direction by the things that you see. And the project I'm going to share with you tonight is a perfect example of that. So I'm going to share my screen and start talking about how this came about and the many rabbit holes I went down and the things that I learned in this particular project. So let me go ahead and share the screen, and hopefully that's showing up correctly and everybody sees the large screen. So this all started back in 2014. I had just started a new job at Boston University as head of instruction. I had 9 librarians reporting to me. And one of those librarians who knew I was as a volunteer, was the head of the Brookline Historical Society, said she had something to give me that she had found in her late mother's belongings. It was a tiny photo album, 3 inches wide by 3 3/4 inches high. And in the inside cover was written in pencil, was the name of a woman that we first read as Marnie. It's actually Mamie Williams, Brookline, March 16th, 1882, and Mass. And on the facing side, an ad for Govan Allen's Gem Albums and Patent Cameras. And as I went through this album, I saw that there were 12 pages, each with 4 photos in them, postage stamp size photos of children, mostly girls. The names were written in pencil. I'm very thankful to Mamie Williams that she identified the people in this album so I could figure out who they were. I recognized many of the last names as those of children of prominent Brookline families, and doing some genealogical digging, I confirmed that indeed that's the families that these children belong to. And there were some people that I knew, a man named Desmond Fitzgerald, who was a well-known water engineer, built the waterworks at Chestnut Hill. A man named Edward Atkinson, who was a pioneer in food safety and other things. Moorfield Story, who was became the first president of the NAACP, as well as some very New England names, 1 Cabot, 2 Danas, 3 Welds. And there were also in the album, there were 4 children, although one of the pictures was missing, of Richardsons. And these were children of the famed architect H.H. Richardson, who lived in Brookline from 1872 until his death in 1884. And digging a little bit further, I found this photograph of the 6 Richardson children credited to Historic New England, although they now say that they don't have this photo, so I'm not sure exactly where I got it, but I got it from somebody. And indeed, I could find the children and match them up with 3 of the children in this picture. So this raised a lot of questions for me. One, who was Mamie Williams? How many of these children can we identify? What became of them later in life? What connection or event led them to all being together in this album? And my first thought is that they were in school together, but they were different ages. I thought they could have all belonged to the same church, perhaps. But by finding their parents' obituaries and where the funerals were, I saw that they belonged to a lot of different churches. Why were the pictures so small? Why is the album from Australia? And I found answers to most of these questions, but I found a lot more than I was looking for as I went down paths going into topics that I didn't know I was interested in. And as a librarian, as I said, I would teach students that research is as much about finding questions as it is about finding answers. And that's been particularly true here. So as I went about trying to answer some of these questions, one of the things that I looked at was again, who was Mamie Williams? And I found in a census record a Mamie Williams, a 28-year-old servant, and it seemed clear to me just from the kind of class of children, the families that were in here, that this was unlikely to be an album that belonged to a servant. But I found a 1892 article in a gossip column in the Boston Globe called Table Gossip that appeared regularly in the Globe. And it said, the Boston correspondent of a New York Sunday paper says the beauties of Boston are now Miss Lulu Williams, Miss Mamie Williams, daughter of the lovely Mrs. Moses Williams, Miss Fairchild, etc. So there was a name, Mamie Williams, daughter of the lovely Moses Williams. And by doing a little further research, I found that on the page where her own picture was, were 3 other children. And by doing some research, I found that Moses Williams, these were indeed the 4 children of Moses Williams. So I had the right person, Mamie and her siblings, shown in this album. There was actually a second picture of Mamie in a mislabeled one that said L. Richardson. I can only guess that she lost the picture and stuck another picture of herself in there. And that's why there are 2 pictures of Mamie Williams. But this is her. Her full name was Mary Eleanor Williams, born in 1870. So 12 years old at the time this album was put together, and lived until 1964. And you can see there's a little bit of damage to the picture, which our webmaster digitized. So this is much larger, obviously, than the original picture. So looking into Mamie and her family, I first found information about her father, a man named Moses Williams. He was a lawyer, a banker, a legislator, director of various industrial enterprises, very prominent in Brookline, and found this picture from the Public Library of Brookline. I found that her mother was born in England. Her mother died when she was only a year old, and her father, a man named Henry Finninley, was a doctor who got into the business of making surgical instruments. And when his daughter, Martha, was 1 year old after his wife died, he moved to Boston, and he set up a business selling medical instruments in Boston, advertised in a couple of local publications, the Journal of Health and Monthly Miscellany, the Boston Medical and Surgical Journal. I even found a program from an amateur theatrical at a Mrs. Cabot's in 1868, the year that Moses Williams and Martha Finninley got married, and there they were before they were married in a appearing together on the stage in an amateur theatrical. So that's the kind of thing that you love to come across when you're trying to learn something about particular people. The Williamsons actually met through the Atkinsons, cousins of Moses Williams, when Martha was taking care of the older Atkinson children. And the Williams house, their first house, is shown in the upper left in a sketch in the Boston Globe, in the lower right, a house that they built afterwards that still stands and is pictured on the right, that was very close to the edge of the Brookline Reservoir. A body of water that still exists, although not used as a reservoir anymore. And the Atkinsons lived on the other side of the reservoir. So you can see the blue and yellow stars indicating where the 2 houses were, and that's the Atkinson house. So they lived very, very close to one another. And Mamie was very close friends with one of the Atkinson children, Carla Atkinson. They were best friends, and I found something that Carla wrote where she said that Mamie went to school before I did and passed on her education to me, teaching me to read by means of pieces of chalk stolen from school and a torn off cover, an old an old book as blackboard. There's a picture of the 2 of them as friends, a little bit older, in the Sophia Smith collection at Smith College, and another picture of Mamie in the back and Carla on the left with an unidentified man and an unidentified dog, all in the collection at Smith College. I also found this picture from the Smith College of a group of young people. Mamie is the second one from the right with a big smile on her face, and they're at the home of the older woman who's pictured the third from the left, who is Susan Hale, who was a writer and a painter who gathered a circle of young people around her that included both Mamie and Carla. Susan Hale was the sister of Edward Everett Hale, the orator and writer who wrote A Man Without a Country, and they were part of this circle. Mamie, like many of the women of her class, was active in a lot of causes. She was on the Simmons College board of corporate board from the beginning, and there was some write-ups about her in Simmons. She was described in older age as a stately lady with snow white hair and merry blue eyes. And another description said of Mamie, a Brookline resident of many years, Miss Williams is the daughter of Moses Williams, whose name is mentioned in the early records of the college. She was educated in private schools in Brookline and went abroad to study languages when she was 15. That was the acceptable education for young women in my day, she said. College was primarily for future teachers and was considered too blue-stocking. However, she added, ideas changed rapidly. For my younger sister, was permitted to attend Bryn Mawr. Her mother was into gardening and helped Isabella Stewart Gardner with gardening at her mansion. Mamie also served on the executive committee of the North Bennett School in the North End and the Women's Industrial and Educational Union in Boston. But it really raised the question is, why did she have pictures of all these children? What was the connection between them? And that brought me back to the facing page, facing her signature with Govan Allen. I knew nothing about Govan Allen, knew nothing about gem albums or patent cameras. But as I researched them, I found that both of these men, Otis Gove and Bennett Allen, were connected at one point to a photographer in Boston named Simon Wing. This is a picture of him from a newspaper article with that lovely beard. I wish my beard could grow that long, but and an ad for him selling photographs, cabinet size, 8x10s, tintypes, and ferrotypes at Wings. And as I read a little bit further, I learned about gem tintypes. That gem tintypes, tintypes, as many of you probably know, were photographs that were printed on. Actually, they were thin sheets of iron, not tin, which is why they were called tintypes and ferrotypes, and printed out. But gem tintypes were these small examples that were taken with multi-lens cameras, from as few as 1 to as many as 18 lenses that the photographer would snap, and all the lenses would snap at the same time and take up to 18 photos, each from a very slightly different angle. And then they would print out, they would develop fairly quickly, and the photographer would have these sheets of almost exactly the same photographs taken with these multi-lens cameras that would then be cut up with tin shears and handed to the person who was having the photograph taken. So this was all new to me. I learned that albums were made to hold these photographs and found pictures of different versions of them. The album that was given to us by the librarian who reported to me is an album of this type, but there were many different styles, different sizes, all designed to hold these tiny gem tintypes within them. And I found articles about gem tintypes, an article from New Hampshire in 1867, about 72 tintypes at one sitting, the only place in Milford where 4 positions are given in 18 and for only 25 cents is at J.S. Massac. So 4 sittings, 72. So an 18 lens camera, you sit 4 times and you get 72 pictures. In 1885 in Ohio, there was a line that said, give me a gem. Have you heard it? It's awful. Awful meaning wonderful. Photographers arrived, kept busy from day till night, taking these small sized photographs. Even later, I found articles in a Chicago Tribune nostalgia column in 1920 called "Do You Remember Way Back When," where one person wrote in and said, you exchanged with your friends gem tintypes about 1 inch square, which cost 25 cents for 20, from somebody written in Grand Rapids. I even found a short story called Tintypes about gem tintypes. And this story kind of answered one of the questions that came up for me, because a lot of the things that I read about gem tintypes talked about how they were so cheap that they made photography accessible to all classes of people, that they weren't as expensive as many kinds of photographs, and many people could afford them, as was shown in some of those comments in the articles. 25 cents for 18 pictures. But I wondered, because the the children in this album that I had in my possession were wealthy families. And I thought, okay, so much of this is about how affordable gem tintypes were to people, but he was a wealthy family. And this story really made it clear to me that they were not just used by people who of lesser income. And the story is about a brother and sister who asked their father for some money. They say, just nothing at all. They said 18 for a quarter of a dollar, which they were going to pay for out of their own income of 10 cents a week. Everybody has them, Papa, and we give them all away. Julie Hand had her 18 Thursday and only one left Friday night. You see, Papa, you have them taken 9 at a sitting in little albums to put them up in. So they had paid to have their pictures taken. They were asking their father for money to buy an album. And in the story, there's a less well-off boy who falls out of a tree and breaks his arm, and they end up giving the album to him. And that's the story. But it told me, and this is in 1867 in a children's magazine published in Boston called Our Young Folks. It told me that indeed the upper classes were using these gem tintypes as well. Here's an ad from another children's magazine published in Boston in 1893 for the gem tintype camera and outfit. And again, has a line in there about exchanging tintypes. And that was part of the appeal of these. To get a camera, you can take pictures and trade them with your friends, sort of like trading cards. I even found an unpublished memoir by Carla Atkinson that I'll talk about a little bit more later. But she wrote, this brings to mind that this was the era of tintypes the size of postage stamps. We all had dozens of them taken. I had 12 dozen and swapped them with, I'm just moving something out of the way on my screen here. And swap them with one another. Some of the girls were forbidden to exchange with boys. I was not so restricted and have today some of those funny little tintypes in my possession. She was writing this in the 1930s. So she's talking about these very photos and these very albums that she and her good friend, Mamie, had. So there I was in this world I knew nothing about, didn't know I was interested in, and suddenly immersed in this world of gem tintypes from this one album. But it raised a lot of questions, other questions for me. Who are all these children? And I researched. Some of it was speculative. Did a lot of research. There were 11 boys and 37 girls, ranging in age from 5 to 20. The boys were a lot easier. They had careers. 2 of them became architects. 2 were in real estate. One was a banker, another a stockbroker. There was a teacher and a musician, 2 involved in their family's hemp business. But the girls often did not have careers, and anyone who's done any kind of research, especially from this era, knows that it's often harder to find things about women and girls, often known to their fathers or their husbands, or in the class that these girls were from, through the society pages and reports of parties and events, and I started to pull things together. Because as much as the technology and the photography was fascinating to me, and still is fascinating to me, I'm always interested in the people. And I know I watched some of last month's presentation, and I know there was a lot about the women photographers and their lives. And I started digging into who are the women who are in this album. I'm going to share a little bit of what I found, and in some ways how I found it. So not surprisingly for women of these class, that like Mamie Williams, a lot of them were involved in charitable work. Mary Dana, who was a little bit older, so 8 years older than Mamie, she chaired a committee overseeing the vacation school at the Dennison House in Boston, a settlement house in the South End. You know, the settlement houses were described as an attempt to heal society by restoring social intercourse between artificially sundered classes. Louise Harding Williams, who was a cousin of Mamie, had worked for many charitable organizations, including the Perkins Institution and the Massachusetts Association for the Blind. She was especially active at another settlement house called Lincoln House in the South End. She was an assistant to Ellen Richards, who was the first woman admitted to MIT and a pioneer in nutrition and home economics, and worked with her on a promotion of a booklet promoting good nutrition for settlement workers and housewives. And she died young in Cohasset in August 2002 at the age of 33. And a tribute from the Perkins School said she died from an overexertion in seeking to solve scientifically the great problem of how to feed the poor well, and at the same time with economy. Literally, she gave herself with all the enthusiasm of her young heart to the well-being of the indigent and the needy. These next three, I call them the three Bessies. All Elizabeths known as Bessie, Bessie Fisk, Bessie Lowell Everett, and Bessie Moorfield Story. Bessie Fisk, when she married, moved to St. Louis and was one of the founders of the St. Louis Children's Aid Society. Bessie Everett worked at a boarding house run by the Boston YWCA. She was on the staff for the Boston Athenaeum as a young woman, and during World War I, she served on the State Commission for the Blind and helped in relief efforts after the great Halifax explosion in 1917 in Canada, in which many people were blinded. And Bessie Moorfield Story, whose father was Moorfield Story was the first president of the NAACP, a white family. She led a women's organization in support of French recovery after World War I, an effort that earned her the French Legion of Honor. She aided that country again after World War II, and in the Boston Globe in 1947, covering a 1947 visit that she made to Normandy, described her as a regal appearing great-grandmother whose fragile exterior appears in great contradiction to her drive, energy, and organizing talent. She was also a leader in the drive to repeal prohibition and active in many other civic organizations. These two women, Elizabeth Dupee and Isabel Lee, I don't have as much information about them. The houses, they both lived in Newton, and their homes still stand and are pictured below. Both of them stand out in many ways because of their family relations. Elizabeth Dupee married a man who became the Middlesex DA district attorney. His name was Endicott Peabody Saltonstall. I don't know if you can get a more New England Yankee name than Endicott Peabody Saltonstall. That was her husband. Isabel Lee was the sister-in-law of Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt, when he was Harvard, met one of his classmates was a brother of Isabel Lee and another sister who became Teddy Roosevelt's first wife, who died tragically very young. Roosevelt actually was married at the First Parish Church in Brookline. That first marriage took place. Many of these young women and in youth and older age were involved in the arts and in literature. Constance Williams, who's pictured here, was one of Mamie Williams' youngest sibling. Love the curls in that picture on the left. And there she is on the right. She became an author who wrote a couple of novels, including one that's shown here called The Phoenix, which Atlantic Monthly described it as the story of a Boston girl's life and love affairs set against the brilliant background of American society. And another monthly magazine, the Overland Monthly, said the novel moves in the best circles and finds in them the average passions and petty jealousies of the rest of the race. So this was a novel written by Mamie's sister, Carla, Mamie's sister, Constance. Carla Atkinson herself worked with Susan Hale, who we saw pictures of earlier, and edited the letters of Susan Hale with a foreword by Susan Hale's brother, Edward Everett Hale. She was also a painter herself, and this is one of the paintings that she did. Their father, Edward Atkinson, was an economist. He was born in 1827 in Brookline in a house that still stands. He got into the dry good business and textiles and fire insurance. He was a frequent writer of letters, essays, and pamphlets, making arguments often backed by statistical analysis. He corresponded with presidents. He was an abolitionist and anti-imperialist, worked for women's suffrage and the rights of free Black people. He was a free trader. and worked on nutritional science, and using some of his knowledge from the fire insurance business, built something called the Aladdin oven, which was designed as a slow cooker. That he was concerned that poorer people had poor nutrition or were spending too much money on expensive cuts of meat, and he used his fire knowledge to build something called the Aladdin oven, which was kind of a slow cooker that would make the most of cheaper cuts of meat. He created recipes for this, and it was said that he taught the American people how to stew. Carla and her brothers are in the album, so I focused mostly on the girls, but this is Carla Atkinson and her older brothers, Robert and William Atkinson. There were 4 other older Atkinson children who are much older, but these are the ones who were kind of contemporaries with Mamie and Carla, and made it into the album. And they all had interesting stories. William Atkinson was an architect, and he and another architect in the early 1900s drew this plan for Brookline Village. That's Boylston Street. Well, it's Washington Street here, then becomes Boylston Street. It's Route 9 heading west from Boston out to the western suburbs. This is Brookline Avenue heading to where the hospitals are. And they came up with this design for these grand buildings there that was never implemented. In a way, some of that is happening now with some of the larger buildings that are being built there. Another relative, many years later, wrote a book about a house designed by William Atkinson on Cape Cod at Wings Neck that was in the family for many years. And the book is called The Big House. And he describes this house designed by William Atkinson. Robert Atkinson is pictured here. Was a businessman. I love this description of him as a young man. Where it says, from 4 o'clock to 5, there was an entertainment. Robert Atkinson, late of Darnham and Daly's, a play obviously on Barnum and Bailey's, gave his musical act playing on several instruments at once. And he built his own house at 38 Heath Street that's pictured here. He's the grandfather of this man, the actor Sam Waterston, Samuel Atkinson Waterston. And I think you can definitely see the family resemblance between these two men in this picture. Also in the arts in the album was a woman named Eleanor Hardy, born in 1869, lived in 1953. She married the painter Dennis Miller Bunker, who made this sketch of her and a painting of her that hangs at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. He died very young. In 1893, catching pneumonia on a visit to Boston to visit her family. And she then married Charles Platt, a landscape designer and an architect who designed the gardens of the Lars and Isabel Anderson estate and the Brandegee estate, both in Brookline, and also designed the Freer Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. They were regulars at the Cornish art colony in New Hampshire around Augustus St. Gaudens, the famous sculptor. A friend of theirs who was also part of that colony was a muralist named Henry O. Walker, and he used Eleanor as the model for a mural called The Wisdom of the Law in the Appellate Court building in Madison Square in New York, built between 1898 and 1899. 70 years later, Eleanor's son, Jeffrey, who was he was the first commissioner of the New York City Landmark Commission, and he was in the courthouse facing a challenge to the preservation law. When he looked around, reported the New York Times, quote, to find a very familiar face staring at him from the courtroom wall. He said, "My God, there was Mother, and I knew everything would be all right." In 2000, the courthouse building was restored by the architectural firm of Platt, Beyer, Doval, and White, which was led by Jeffrey's nephew, Eleanor's grandson, Charles Platt. So these family connections that come up in the, I don't know if you'd call them coincidences or not, probably not, just are a delightful part of research in general and the surprises that come along as you are working on things. This is Lucia Fairchild. She is in this album with her sister, Sally, who I'm going to talk about quite a bit. Lucia became an artist. She studied under Dennis Miller Bunker, the man who first married Eleanor before he died. She married a painter named Henry Brown Fuller. They too were part of the Cornish Art Gallery. There's a picture of her with her daughter held by the Pocumtuck Valley Memorial Association in Deerfield, Mass. She eventually earned most of her living. Her husband never made much money, and she supported the family. She became a miniaturist. She painted miniature portraits and supported the family that way. But it was a tough go, and she had a lot of problems with her vision over the years, which made it impossible to continue doing miniatures. But she was quite successful. At the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893, there was a building called the Women's Building that had murals by 4 different women artists, the most famous of whom is Mary Cassatt. But one of the women who did this was Lucia, Lucia Fairchild, and she painted something called the Women of Plymouth, and you can see it on the wall in the black and white photo from the Women's Building, and there's a picture of the mural that was there. Today, I went to see this. It's actually in a building that's the Grange Hall in Plainfield, New Hampshire, very close to where the Cornish Art Colony was. And there's a flea market up there, and it's really rather bizarre. You've got this painting that was done in 1893 when she was 23 years old that hung at the Columbian Exposition, the Women's Building, and it's just behind a curtain on a stage in this hall that's basically a flea market today. But it seems to be in pretty good shape, at least. So the Grange folks at least seem to prevent it from getting further damaged. But Lucia Fairchild Fuller did a lot of work. In 1900, she had a painting, a portrait of a child at the Paris Exposition. She has a painting by a clear fountain, a nude, at the Smithsonian Art Museum. There's a self-portrait of her as a young woman, all next to the painting of her that appears in the photo album that we have. This is her older sister, Sally, who's a year older, and is the person that I think it's fair to say I became a little bit obsessed with, as you'll see. She was born 1869, lived to 1960. She had red hair, and she taught kindergarten in the Boston Normal School and a school in Chestnut Hill. Never really had a career, but as I researched her, I found that she was painted by John Singer Sargent 3 times. These are 3 paintings of her by John Singer Sargent. She met with and was photographed by George Bernard Shaw. These are photographs of Sally, also known as Sadie, that were taken by George Bernard Shaw. And a wide variety of famous and accomplished men and women left remembrances of Sally Fairchild. William James, Sargent and Shaw, Ellen Terry, who was probably the leading Shakespearean actress of her day in England, Beatrice Webb, one of the founders of the Fabian Society, H.G. Wells, Bertrand Russell, George Santayana, Ethel Barrymore. It was just like, it was astounding to find out how many people knew her, met her, and were impressed by her. William James, at one point in Boston, was giving a lecture at Harvard that was for men only. Sally attended. She was hidden behind a screen, but she was there. George Bernard Shaw, who met her through Ellen Terry, and I'll tell you how they met a little bit about how they met a little bit later, but he wrote it one time. I found a writing where he said, "I've been happy all the evening, but dead. I couldn't read, and there was nothing to read anyhow. Sadie," that's Sally Fairchild, "saw that I was a mere rag. When Edie was gone," Edie was Ellen Terry's daughter, "Sadie spread me out on the hearthrug on my back and relaxed me. You know, the Annie-Payson call system. It means simply petting a tired man." And I looking into what that system was, it was basically a kind of massage. So I don't think there was anything sexual involved in that, but she's giving massages to George Bernard Shaw. Sorry, I'm skipping a page in my notes. Ellen Terry wrote that the first time he, meaning Shaw, came to my house, I was not present, but a young American lady who had long adored him from the other side of the Atlantic took my place as hostess. I was at the theater as usual, and I took great pains to have everything looking nice. I spent a long time putting out my best blue china and ordered a splendid dinner, quite forgetting the honored guest generally dined off a biscuit and a bean. Mr. Shaw read Arms in the Man to my young American friend, Miss Sadie Fairchild, without even going into the dining room where the blue china was spread out to delight his eye. Beatrice and Sidney Webb were founders of the Fabian Society. They were co-founders with Shaw of the London School of Economics, now the School of Economics and Political Science. They have letters that written by Sally at the Women's Library. I was in London. I was in London visiting my daughter, who was studying abroad at one point, and went there and looked at some of these letters. And Beatrice Webb talked about meeting the Fairchild family when she was in Boston, and she described them. She said the mother had been uncommonly good-looking and had the dignified graciousness of the elderly American lady. The daughter, Sally Fairchild, the tall, graceful girl with brilliant hair, pretty features, and a bright, capable intelligence, was remarkable for having combined personal charm and a semi-professional career as a teacher in primary schools. So Sally was attractive, but she was also intellectual, and this is part of what endeared her and engaged her with many of these famous people. The philosopher George Santayana. This is a picture of Sally as a teen or a young 20s. Santayana wrote at a visit to an estate that Sally Fairchild was also, to my surprise, at Haslemere, and I have met her several times since. She's staying now with Ellen Terry. She seems to be a great success with the virtuous intellects over here who take her seriously. And there was a letter at Harvard, I believe, to Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., who was on the Supreme Court, and Sally wrote from London, went to the National Gallery on the 15th of June after all, but said, as I didn't really expect you, I took another man to console me. Now that I know it is better to stay at home and be a Chief Justice than to come to London, even when everyone is clamoring for you. I am very glad for you, but please don't get too proud. I really couldn't bear to come home and have you pass me by with a cold nod. I shall come back next month, and I hope I shall see you very soon, and that I am truly glad to have the Chief Justice for a friend. Faithfully yours, Sally Fairchild. This is written from Bertrand Russell's home, Friday Hill, in August of 1899. H.G. Wells came to America in 1906, working on a book called The Future in America. And it was a look at social issues in the United States. While he was here, he met with Teddy Roosevelt at the White House. He met with Booker T. Washington. He met with Jane Addams of Hull House in Chicago. And he wrote a note to Sally on board because it had been recommended that he meet with her as well. I did not find any indication that they ever met, but he was on her list of people that he was going to meet. Bertrand Russell, in his autobiography, written in 1967, 7 years after Sally died, and 7 years after Sally died, and 70 years after he met her, wrote this about her. And this is a painting not done by Sargent, but by someone else, of Sally Fairchild that shows her red hair. And Russell wrote, I remember the summer of 1899 as the last time that I saw Sally Fairchild until one afternoon in 1940 when we met as old people and wondered what we had seen in each other. She was an aristocratic Bostonian of somewhat diminished fortunes who I had first come to know in 1896 when we were staying in Boston. In the face, she was not strikingly beautiful, but her movements were the most graceful that I have ever seen. Innumerable people fell in love with her. In the summer of 1899, she paid a long visit to Friday Hill, that's his estate, and I became very fond of her. I did not consider myself in love with her, and I never so much as kissed her hand, but as years went by, I realized that she had made a deep impression on me, and I remember as if it were yesterday, our evening walks in the summer twilight, while we were restrained by the strict code of those days from giving any expression whatsoever to our feelings. This is 70 years later, he's writing this as a memory. So she clearly had something about her, and again, it was not just good looks, but an intellectual capacity and an engagement that attracted many men. I even found that when she was 80 years old, a Boston man named Donald Munson, who owned one of the Sargent paintings of Sally, was sued for divorce by, he was 40 years old. He was sued for divorce by his 40-year-old wife. And Sally, who was 80 at the time, was named as the correspondent. So she was 80, he was 40. The divorce went through, and this is a picture from the Boston Herald of Sally at age 86 with Donald Munson in front of one of the Sargent paintings in an exhibit at the MFA. And in her final years, he took care of her. So again, what was it about it? Well, clearly, Bertrand Russell said she wasn't beautiful in the face. I kindly disagree, but she clearly had a way about her, both in appearance and in personality and intelligence that attracted a lot of people. You remember back at the very beginning, I shared the article from the Globe about a New York paper about the beauties of Boston that mentioned Mamie Williams, the woman whom I started this. It also mentions Miss Fairchild, daughter of Charles Fairchild, and later in it said Miss Fairchild is the most picturesque of these girls. So I found her through the album of Mamie Williams, and this article mentions both of them as among the beauties of Boston. I also found in this book written in the 1960s called The Gentle Americans about the Brahmin class of Bostonians, and it described, we'll come back for a second, it described several of the women of the Brahmin class, including a group, a breed, she said, which seems to have no counterparts in succeeding generations, which one might call the romantic maidens. There were Miss Allie Houghton, Miss Sadie Fairchild, Miss Mamie Williams, to name only three strikingly beautiful and fascinating women who remained mysteriously unmarried in spite of continuing charm for the opposite sex all their lives. So there are some indications that all of these women may have been lesbians. It's not entirely clear. Probably we'll never know for sure. But as this book wrote, they were beautiful women. None of them ever married. At least one of them may have been in what was known as a Boston marriage. But going a little bit into the family of the Fairchilds, these are her parents. Charles Fairchild was from Madison, Wisconsin. His father was the first mayor of Madison. His brother became governor of Wisconsin. Sally's mother, Lily Nelson Fairchild, grew up in Concord and Carlisle. Her father was a friend of Thoreau. As a young woman, Lily would go for walks with Emerson. She was in school with Nathaniel Hawthorne's son. She wrote poetry herself under a pen name. The pen name was the initial C.A. and the last name Price. So C.A. Price, clearly a pun on caprice. And she wrote several poems. She became an early supporter of Walt Whitman. She was a friend of Mark Twain's, of Robert Louis Stevenson, who visited the house, of William and Henry James, and of several others. And the Fairchild family, while most of the children in the album lived in Brookline, some in Newton, some were in Boston. The Fairchilds lived in this building, still standing, 191 Commonwealth Avenue. It's now 16 condominium units, but at the time it was 6 floors, and each floor was one family. And the Fairchild family lived there. Probably the most famous resident of the building was Henry Lee Higginson, the founder of the Boston Symphony and a partner of Charles Fairchild. Sally, as I said, never married, but her sister Lucia, a year younger, who's in the album, in doing research, I found her grandchild, a woman named Lucia Taylor Miller. Found her online. She was a sculptor living in Chicago. That's her on the left. Pictures of her grandmother, Lucia Fairchild, and her grandmother's sister, Sally, and the 7 Fairchild children. The 2 on the right are Sally and Lucia. They're the 2 oldest. The youngest 5 are all boys, including the one in a dress at the end. So the 5 youngest children were all boys. And she gave me this picture. she gave me a lot of information and a lot of material, more pictures, letters, and many things about the Fairchild family that led to much more research. It's also, the letter that she's holding is something that she pulled out. I'm just going to read to you this letter that she was very proud of, that was written to her great grandmother, to Sally and Lucia's mother. She said, "We wish to thank you, Fairchilds, most heartily for your hospitable invitation, for we have to lose the chance for the same old reason, scarlet fever. This in our coachman's family, and so we ourselves have gone into quarantine for a spell. We have seldom received so much attention from Providence as this year. If we were not naturally modest, we should feel proud." And then it's written, "Pray for us," and that's crossed out, and it says, "No, don't. It might attract further attention to us. With kind regards to you both, yours sincerely, S.L. Clemens." That's Samuel Clemens or Mark Twain. So this family was very well connected. So Sally not only got her looks from family members, but clearly came from a connected and intellectually connected family that knew many famous people that she carried on with in many, many ways. Lucia Taylor Miller, this is a picture of her grandmother, Lucia. Up at the top, there's Lucia with the letter in the bottom. And at the bottom, some of you may recognize this. This is Lucia Taylor Miller's granddaughter. So the great granddaughter of Lucia Fairchild. And that is Taylor Schilling, the actress who's the star of the, I think it's an HBO series, Orange is the New Black, about women in prison. So lots of connections. And her mother, so Lucia Miller's daughter, works at MIT, lives in the Boston area, and I've met with her several times, and she's given me many more materials and more information. And I have recordings that I recorded several hours of conversation with Lucia Taylor Miller about her family, and she died 3 years ago, which I only recently learned. So as you can see, a lot of things that I learned, a lot of rabbit holes that I went down, all coming out of this one little tiny photo album that was given to me by somebody who worked for me in 2014. So starting with learning a lot about this type of photography, and you know, as it says, say that every picture tells a story, but every picture also asks a question, and these pictures asked lots of questions and led to lots of answers and lots of things that I learned about tintypes and gem tintypes. I learned about John Singer Sargent, who my own tastes in painting tend to be more modern, but I've become to be much more appreciative of Sargent and his style of painting, and I've learned a lot more about him. I didn't know very much about the Sidney and Beatrice Webb, and I learned a lot about them and about Ellen Terry and her daughter, Edith Cragg, who was mentioned in the correspondence, and who was herself a lesbian who lived with two other women and corresponded and met with Sally several times. And I learned about Victorian women and upper class women in the late 19th and early 20th century, and their lives, the work that they did in social endeavors, their education, and many other things that taught me things. Again, I had no idea I was interested, all out of this little Govan Allen album from Australia that was given to me in 2014 by somebody who worked for me who had no idea why her mother had it. So that's that, and I'm happy to take questions and engage in conversation.
Thank you, Ken. That was wonderful. I love a bibliography at the end of a presentation. Really, really wonderful presentation. And so I don't think of it as a rabbit hole at all. I think of this as this broadening network of almost like lace. I think of like lace making and all the intricate connections.
Yeah, that's really true. And my own kind of metaphor for that, and I love a good metaphor. I even love a bad metaphor, but and I use this a lot when I was telling students about research, that I consider that research is never really done. And my metaphor is that it's like a jigsaw puzzle with no border pieces. And you're just always adding to it and building out this picture that just goes in different directions. And this is true of so many of the research projects that I engage in, sometimes involving photographs and sometimes not. That somebody attends one of my presentations or finds something I write in my blog and tells me something or shares more information that I didn't have before, and I add to it. There are some presentations that I've done over and over again, and I'm revamping them constantly because I find more things, I find more information, and it really is. I mean, rabbit hole is a good metaphor, but really, it's an exploration, and rabbit holes are a good metaphor because they go all over the place, and this does as well.
That's great. I love that jigsaw puzzle image. We have a couple of questions. Lee McIntyre has a couple of questions. Says, thanks for a great talk. Just curious if you have any idea where the photos were taken, in Brookline or elsewhere.
That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer. My guess is that they were taken in Boston, not in Brookline. One of the projects that's a very long ongoing project for me is a study of retail businesses in Brookline and their growth. And so I do know that there were a number of photographers in the late 1800s in Coolidge Corner, but the Coolidge Corner really commercial district didn't really develop until the late 1880s, and this album is earlier than that. So there may have been some photographers elsewhere in Brookline, but I suspect that these were taken in Boston, maybe at Wings. Wing Studio, but that's a really good question. I do when I last met with Lucia Miller's daughter, and she we went through some of the material that her mother gave me, and I have a lot of other photographs of the family there, and some of those do mention the studios. And I should go back and look and see which studios they were. So it's possible that these were taken there, but it would be interesting to look again and see what studios there were in Boston that were doing gem tintypes and where they were being sold. So I love good questions because as I tell people on walking tours and presentations, if I get asked a question I don't know to the answer to, it prompts me to try and find the answer, and that helps build my knowledge as well. I guess was there another part of that question?
Yes. What connected the children? It sounds like as adults, a lot of the women were connected through various organizations and connections.
Yeah, I think they were connected socially, and that was one of my first explorations, and those first ideas that they all go to school together, but some of them didn't even go to school. They were educated at home, and they belonged to different churches. That was my second thought, and the fact that they were whole families is that I think they were social connections, that they just moved in the same social circles, and so they traded these photos with one another. It was a craze among their class to get these albums, have these gem tintypes taken, and trade them with their friends. And we do have some other gem tintype albums that have been given to us over the years, including one that nobody has identified. So I'm so thankful to Mamie for writing the names in here. But we do have another that's actually not in an album made for gem tintypes, but is gem type just painted into a little notebook that does have also mostly women that are identified. So I suspect that that's how they came together before they were adults.
Also, unlike a cabinet card or a carte de visite, there's usually no information on the back because
right.
it's just the metal, or sometimes there will be a label which can often get separated from the object. So it's harder to trace where they came from.
Yeah, there are several years ago, I spent 2 weeks at Dartmouth at a 2-week kind of seminar program about research, and a lot of the Fairchild material is in the archives at Dartmouth, and I spent in my spare time there going through that, and there was some other gem tintypes there, including copies of some of these same ones, but others of Sally and Lucia, taken at different times because they were wearing different clothes and different angles and all. And those were not put in albums, so they didn't have like glue stains on the back like these do. But there was no information on the back. But I'll look through the other things, and I think it's a definite good area for me to do some more research on.
Thanks. And as for the wings, there was a 2018 journal dedicated to Simon Wing and the Simon Wing Photography Museum, his cameras, his work. So
Oh, I'd love to see that.
yeah, it's there's a link on the PHSNE.org website to all of our publications, and you
Great.
You can even download, I believe, that issue. Is that right, Reich?
Yes, the 2018 issue was pretty much subtlety about Simon Wing, and some of the family members who were associated with Wing. I also I have to bring it up that our next journal, the 2022 journal, is also involved with Simon Wing and has roots in Australia, of all places. So when I saw the inside of that album, I said, holy mackerel. It's a small world of gem tintypes.
It really is.
If you don't mind, I'll ask a question. Do you think those, I wrote a question that said, what was the median age of the kids in the gem album? And I'm wondering more generally, what approximate ages do you think they were? Were they taken all at the same time, or it seems like that might have been the case because they all seem to be of such similar ages, but that's hard to know.
Yeah, it is hard to know. The ages vary in part because there are family pictures. So like Mamie's younger sister was, I forget how much, she's maybe 7 or 8 or even 10 years younger than her. So she's like 5 or 6 at the time of the album, whereas Mamie, I think, is 13. But I'd say the biggest group is around Mamie's age, so 12 or 13, and some of their older and younger siblings are in there as well, and a few who a few years older or younger. But that's kind of like the core group is 12 or 13 in 1882, and it's
Okay.
it's a little hard to be sure. Some of the photos in the album could indeed have been taken earlier, but obviously, since it's she's written the date, they've not taken after that. So it's possible that some of them are photos that they had left over from earlier photo shoots.
Okay, so that puts Mamie at being born in 1870, or approximately, if that's.
Yeah, she was born 1870. Yeah.
Okay, all right, that's kind of what I was wondering. I'm trying to get that sorted out. Fantastic research project. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. I love doing research, and I love sharing the research. So.
Did you ever see the reverse of any of those tintypes? Were they ever taken from the album? Were they all sort of left in?
Yeah, our webmaster, when he scanned them, took them out because they're just partly covered within the frames, and I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure I've seen the backs of them, and I don't believe there's anything on them, but I'll double check.
Can I take a minute to show you a rare gem tintype that I have?
Sure. Let's
Can you see this? This is Abraham Lincoln. This was the gem tintype that was used for his election when he was elected president of the United States. It was made to be pinned on your shirt and worn around.
Ah,
If you turn it around on the back, it's got a picture of Hannibal Hamlin, who was his running mate. A lot of people don't know who his running mate was, but they were both elected. However, they asked Abraham Lincoln about this picture, and he said two things got him elected president: his speech at Cooper's Union and this picture that was taken by Matthew Brady. So we know where this Tintype comes from. Below that is the second Tintype of Abraham Lincoln. These are very rare and hard to get a hold of. This one here was made after he was assassinated. And these were made on this little badge that it's on, and showing that he was very sad about Abraham Lincoln being assassinated. The third one at the bottom is a Tintype that was made and put on a card like a frame to go into a CDV album, a McCarthy Visit album. And that way there, anytime you looked in your album, you would be reminded of Abraham Lincoln. One more thing, and then I'll get off. There was a lot of talk about the camera that you see on the front of that little album. That's called a Yankee multiplier. I have one of those cameras, just like the one you were talking about. Mine is number 2. I believe it's the second one that Wing made. They were made by Simon Wing, made by Simon Wing, and they were franchised. At first, if you had one, nobody else would get one within so many miles of your studio. So at first they were separated, but as time went on, they kind of came together. Other people got them. Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you, Jack. That was great. Couple other questions. Here's an announcement from Jeff Seidemann. I invite everyone to attend my presentation on history photography, November 15th, 1 to 3 p.m. at the Waltham Senior Center, 488 Main Street, and it's listed in the most recent snapshots.
Thank you.
Let's see. L.E. Russo says, I have a digitized photo, which is tangentially related in that one of the people in the photos is John Singer Sargent. The subject of the photo is 2 females, a mother and a daughter that he is painting a portrait of, and they are likely well-heeled members of a Boston society at that time. Sounds very cool. And it says further, while they're attractive, it's clear that Sargent has enhanced their appearances. They were probably quite happy with the resulting paint. Let's see, Lee asks, is there any evidence that any of the kids later did photography as a serious hobby and the family actually had one of those gem cameras that were in the ad that you showed, since many of the women were artists later on?
Not that I know of. I think if that were the case, yeah, the evidence of that would likely turn up in things written about them or memoirs or something. I haven't explored even if books written about these particular women or memoirs of them exist. So it's possible, but not that I'm aware of. And my sense is that these were probably all taken in studios. I don't think any of them, most certainly in 1882, I doubt that they had the cameras. And even that Youth's Companion ad for a camera was somewhat later. It was 1895. So.
Yeah, and
I
I
have
thought
2 other type cameras in my types. One was made in the United States. That's a street camera, and the other one was made in Switzerland. It's also a street camera, but that's for show and tell later on.
that would be great, Jack. Why don't you sign up for December? That would be fantastic. I'll post the link again into the chat right now. this bit.ly link is where you can go to sign up in a spreadsheet for 5-10 minutes at the holiday show and tell party in December 4th, 7:30. 7 o'clock will be the annual meeting, and then we'll have a get together with everyone for people to share and enjoy each other's company. So let's see. Ellie Russo says images of the photograph of Singer Sargent, his patrons, and the finished painting should be attached to the chat if you'd like to see them. I don't know that you can attach images. I'm not seeing any attachments. Maybe a link would work. There's a link to the image. Ron says, Wing franchises extended across North America and the Pacific, and it wasn't unusual for his surplus gem albums to be sold in the US. Stay tuned for the 2022 journal.
Yeah, I got a little preview of that, and that was the answer to the surplus was the answer to one of the unsolved mysteries is why an album from Australia was showing up in Boston. I did after I saw that because I subscribed to it's actually a free Australian newspaper database. I subscribe to many newspaper databases, many of them for money, but the Australian one is free. It's called Trove, and I found several articles about Govan Wing in Australia, and apparently their business there continued after they left for a period.
And I have to say that I can tell that you were an instructing librarian because of the way that you laid out everything and how you traced each connection. It was really nicely done. And it's a great way to encourage people to start doing their own research and tracing that little piece of information they can find with a photograph, and just see where it takes you. And it's an incredible broad history, and I love hearing about these women.
Yeah, I many years ago there was a librarian who he wrote a lot in one of the big library journals, and he said something about librarians love to search, everyone else loves to find, and I felt chastened because I always talked about the search, and then I realized that he's wrong, that people do, one, they like to hear about the search process, but they also learn from it. And I'll also share that one of my principal roles in my 7 years at Boston University was working with the first year writing program. I had a very close relationship with them, and I worked with a lot of classes. And one of the classes I worked with for several years was a class called because the instructors could come up with any topic they wanted to, and the students explored them, and they can be very creative. And there was a class called Family Snaps that was all about family portraits and what they say and what they mean. And I think if I can find it, I'll put it in the chat. There's I created a research guide, which I think is still up about that has some examples there. So I think people might find that interesting. I'll take a look while we see what else.
Okay, I'm posting into the chat one more time the Brookline Historical Society website and Ken's blog. Those two links you can access. They are also in the snapshots article, so you can access them from the web version, or you can see them in your print version. Let me just see it.
It's also on the homepage of PHSNE, because it's the meeting information.
And I just put into the chat a link to the Family Snaps and Stories research guide, and that has a little slideshow of different kinds of family pictures, from classic family pictures to pictures taken at department stores for the holidays, to sculptures, ancient sculptures of families, and kind of ways of thinking about family pictures and what they mean.
That's great. I love it. I just took a peek. Does anyone have any other questions they would like to ask live before we close?
Yeah, Dan, I want to make a comment, getting back to the metaphors. You know, I am just so impressed at the research that Ken, that you've done. And it reminds me of, this is an original for me, but your research is like all these little pearls of information that were out there in all different places. And every once in a while, someone comes along, in this case, it's you, to string those pearls together to make a beautiful necklace, you know, and the necklace isn't tied yet. So there's still more pearls to be added, but I think you did an unbelievable job in putting all this together. And we really appreciate it. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I will say, you know, when I first moved to Brookline in 1996, and I've always been interested in the history of wherever I've lived. I grew up in the Bronx and moved to Boston in 1980 and lived in various parts of the Boston area. But I started, you know, learning about Brookline and was thinking, oh, this is really fascinating stuff and really interesting. But at first I was thinking, well, people have been here a long time and they know all this. It's not news to them. But part of what's happened is with the explosion of technology and digitization of things that it's still a lot of work, but you can find things now that you couldn't even find before. And that's still the case. The Brookline newspapers are on microfilm. And I'm sure nobody has used that microfilm more than I have. And it used to be that I would sit on the microfilm machine and I'd spin the reels and I'd take pictures with my phone or I'd print out something. And then they put them onto a reader where I can actually take images. And now during the pandemic, they've been digitizing the newspapers. And one of the things that I found is that a lot of the information that appears, because there was some volunteers who did an index at one point, and it's a index of articles, but there's so much in local newspapers that appears in like gossip columns where there's just 15 paragraphs, and each paragraph is a piece of information, and that's not indexed. They're not indexed to that level. But now, with things being digitized, you can find those little tidbits that were nearly impossible to find. Other than by reading everything, which nobody has time to do. So I think another 20 years from now, artificial intelligence is going to find things in ways that will be less painstaking. But right now, the digitization has helped a lot, but it's still a lot of painstaking. I think for everything I find, I look at 30 things and pull it together. But it's so much fun.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you. And Ellie Russo has posted the link to the Sargent photo in the chat, to the painting and the photo. Thank you.
Great.
So I think, Ben, where are we at? Are we about the point where we want to wrap it up?
Well, I don't think Ben stayed on.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, but it's Dana, good timing. And John, thanks for covering for me. I'm a little under the weather tonight, but it's I think it's great timing. Ken, that was a fantastic job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
You can all unmute and give Ken a round of applause because it was a fantastic presentation. And we look forward to having you as a PHSNE member because you will have a free membership for a year. So you'll be in the know. And please join us in December.
Great. If my calendar works, I'll plan to be there. It sounds exciting. I might even volunteer, share some
That
other
would be
stuff.
great. We need people to sign up. So we've got four people. We've got 8 more slots about. So please feel free.
Dana, I had a very quick comment for Ken.
Sure.
About gem tintypes. I don't know if you've ever experienced this. They had this incredible surge in popularity a few years ago. People who had nothing much to do with photography were just snapping them up. People who make doll houses apparently love gem tintypes because depending on the scale of your doll house, the thing fits on a wall, and that's your.
That's cool.
Yeah. And somebody was a dollhouse maker, a woman who was into dolls was explaining this to me. And I'm going, oh my gosh, I was just hoping that she wasn't being a marauder and ripping apart these albums. And she assured me that she only went after loose ones because she had a historical bent herself. So, but one other thing, we here up in Canada, up in the PHSC, forgive my very bad image. I'm just driving back home to Toronto tonight. I spent the day in my favorite suburb of Toronto. That would be Buffalo. We've got an event on the evening of Wednesday, November the 16th. We've got a gentleman named Christopher Crichton. He's going to be speaking on circuit cameras and panoramic photography. I'll do a president to president thing. I'll send your president information about that, as you did with this presentation, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for keeping us in the loop about your events, and I'll keep you in the loop about our events. I figured the circuit camera one, the panoramic photography. This guy is a retired school teacher. His presentation, I think, is going to be pretty fantastic. That's Wednesday night, November the 16th. So be there, join us. I'll send you more information, Mr. President.
Yes, and long. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and drive safely.
Indeed, yes. I've got another. I pulled over. I was going to watch. And,
Yeah, good.
I just pulled over.
Good work, Clint.
So, thanks very much.
Dana,
Yes.
this is it. It's sort of serendipity, but John Dockery and Holly isn't on the line, but I think I copied you. John Dockery found a WHDH story about Revere High School with photography teacher. They're strictly digital, no wet, but she is showing the students tintype image making.
Nice.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
And it's a story, and it happens that in Revere, Massachusetts, there's a couple, and they have opened a small home business called Evoke Tintype, and you can go and have tintypes made in with your favorite background, and I guess it's quite enthusiastic. And one of the big hits of our Photographica back in April was the tintype done by the gentleman.
Oh, yes, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Are they using dry plate or wet plate?
Wet plate.
Okay. Right.
Right.
May
Again,
I?
I'm not an expert,
Right.
But we will put things together, John, for a future snapshot, submission about this. And Holly will be in touch with the teacher in Revere and add her to our visiting role.
I have to check this out. I may have to get my tintype and kind of pair it with Sally's, although my wife will kill me. I visited Sally's grave in Newport, Rhode Island, and my daughter, who was abroad at the time, happened to call me, and I told her what I was doing, and she said, "Does Mom know?" And I said, "Yeah, she's okay with my seeing other women as long as they're dead." So,
I'd like to read an observation from 30 years ago about research. This is from a book, Between the Landscape and Its Other by Paul Vanderbilt. Okay. And in it, he wrote, Daniel W. Jones is perhaps the most knowledgeable photographic editor in the United States. And he once told me that he knew only one effective way to use an institutional photographic archive. Begin at the beginning and look at everything until one's time and patience run out.
Thanks, John.
You're here for the engine.
That's great.
There's just a few more quick questions, and then we'll close for the evening. Ellie Russo says there's a tintype photographer who's a member of the USEA SOA Artists Co-op as well, who makes tintypes while you wait. And Audrey says that she wants to watch the recorded session later on. Just returned from the Griffin Museum of Photography, and there are a dozen or so hand-colored tintypes included from the collection of Olivia Parker. So Griffin is close by, so everybody who's local, check that out. And I think we've come to the end of the evening. So I want to thank Ken again for answering all the questions and for such a great presentation. We really, really enjoyed it, and we hope to see you again soon.
Great. Thank you all. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you.